Drums of War, Chapter 41. Another Deep Breath. Aboard the Nathan Hale, as she sailed through hyperspace, Corporal Peter George knew that the new stripes on his khaki duty uniform did not actually itch. He knew they didn't weigh it down, too. Well, in a technical sense, the corporal stripes had a little more material than lance corporal stripes. But point of fact, he never actually got to wear those ones. He was field promoted the first time. You can't turn down a field promotion. The trouble was that it was actually possible to turn down a promotion in normal circumstances. However, just because having the lives of other men on his shoulders was the last thing in the world he wanted, was no reason to be a coward. He was R&I, and when someone puts their trust in an R&I trooper, he takes a swing. Worse, his ribbons block just didn't tell the story of his training and qualifications anymore. No, now it had the ribbons of fucking medals on it. He thought medals were fine for other people. And really, the whole point is so that the civvies can feel better about the horrendous shit servicemen have to face and do to keep them safe. So, making a man wear a medal, especially the Order of Mars and the Golden Comet and the Naval Seal of Valor, when there was no civvies to be had, was, in his view, silly at best. Sure, his actions had saved the lives of about half the platoon. Sure, he did ensure that no Terran technology fell into enemy hands. And yes, he did it all at great personal risk and very nearly died and only narrowly made extraction. But he thought all of that was beside the point. He was only doing his job, and if anybody else had seen a way clear to take those same actions, then they would have. They were all R&I, after all. Thankfully, he could leave the medals and their ribbons behind when they made the drop. These thoughts and feelings were distracting him, and so he did his best to push them far from the surface of his mind. He took a breath, held it, and slowly exhaled as if he was taking a shot. The room was stark, large enough to fit the platoon, and little consideration in the way of decoration. Less consideration was given to comfort. There was no gentle slope so that the men at the back would be able to see over their comrades' heads. The folding chairs were hard, inflexible plastic, and the tables were slightly too narrow to comfortably lean on without tipping one over. However, the furniture would take up hardly any space when stowed. The DRS troopers didn't need comfort, not for a quick briefing. By the time Corporal George's breath had fully left his lungs, the door opened and First Lieutenant Jacob Hammond quietly strode to the front of the room, followed by the stomping feet of the Gunnery Sergeant Michael Thornton, who began passing out tablets loaded with the briefing materials. Holographic displays were for ships that didn't have to worry about having bright power signatures. "Quiet, please, gentlemen," Lieutenant Hammond drawled in that exaggerated twang of a man from Texan, Texas, or maybe Superior, Texas. It was difficult for Corporal George to tell. He'd never say so aloud in front of such a man, but nearly all the Texan accents were indistinguishable. Well, not unless it would be really funny anyway. The call for quiet had been unnecessary in the silent room, but Corporal George gathered it was the lieutenant's customary opening as he continued. "As you know, we have work to do, so let's get a handle on the job. Most and foremost, we have a few transfers. Let me put your minds at ease. We have no fresh boots in this transfer, all veterans of multiple drops. Not regular combat drops, or kind of drops. You can discuss the details amongst yourselves after the briefing is concluded." Quick glances flashed amongst the teams throughout the room, and Corporal George felt eyes land on his ribbons. However, the gaze of Lieutenant Hammond swept across the room, and the tension of forming questions faded back into the anticipating quiet attention afforded to such briefings. Corporal George took a tablet from Gunnery Sergeant Thompson with a nod of thanks and activated it. Oh, good. A logistical center. Hopefully they'd be able to find the information Command was so hungry for here. The Exarch, most people deliberately got the name wrong, but not Lieutenant Hammond, and not any other deep recon scout trooper. The enemy had become people after their enough time spent amongst them. Twisted, brutal, and brutalized people, but still people all the same. Call this planet Azad. We think it has something to do with strength in the precursor language of theirs. More importantly, recent intel indicates that this is another planet with long occupation, but has not been repurposed for production. The records of the Exarch's precursors might be accessible in part, and might point to their seat of power or origin point. This is our main objective. Understood? A quiet wave of icer washed across the room. However, this is also a major transit hub, and for some reason the acolyte lords and up love to go on leave dirtside. They throw themselves parties, kill some slaves, select some females, the usual. This gives you prime opportunity to disrupt the chain of command, especially in forces meant to reinforce the front. Additionally, as discussed, this is a major logistics center. So you all have plenty of opportunity to disrupt supply. Probably better opportunity to disrupt supply than command. However, do not forget that our main objective is the information. Any questions? Do we have any intercepts from the planet? Sergeant Daniel Reese asked as he scrolled through the information. Tons. The grinding rocks that are alleged to be Gunnery Sergeant Thompson said. More than we can fit on the tablets. The nerds tried to pare it down to potentially useful info, but you, like as not, will need to make your own assessments. The sergeant grunted in reply, and PFC Lucas Bennett asked, Did Command pick our code names as a joke? No, the lieutenant answered quizzically. Why do you ask? This video in the interception section, and where Uriel platoon. Come on, either they have a real twisted sense of humor, or maybe I ought to go back to church more. Curious. Corporal George tapped on the file that his comrade was lighting and suppressed the instinct to recoil in disgusted horror. The screen was filled with the scene of torture and death, set in one of the temples to Azur. Above one of the altars to him was what looked like an awful lot like a recreation and martyrdom of St. Peter. The poor exarch was even praying in their harsh, guttural language. O Father, withhold the cup of wrath from these lost children. They do not know what they do. Maybe you ought to go back to church, Gunnery Sergeant Thompson rumbled. That was picked up by our very own nerds just 2 days ago. I didn't realize the exarch had Christians, someone else muttered. They might not be exarch, Lieutenant Hammond said. Don't forget the pacificians sent missionaries all over exarch space. Missionaries that underwent the same surgical alterations we did to blend in. This would be the first they've caught. Jesus, Mary, and all the saints and martyrs, Corporal George whispered before clearing his throat and saying, I see an opportunity for psych warfare, sir. You want to start handing out Bibles or some shit, sir? PFC Aaron Mitchell asked. Don't sir me, I'm a corporal. Corporal George said absently before clarifying. Maybe. But the local lord was obviously threatened by Christianity enough to make an example and use the crown of thorns and St. Peter's crucifix to do it symbolically. It might be effective to make some more symbolic gestures of our own. What do you have in mind? Lieutenant Hammond asked quietly. I'm reminded of the story of when the Babylonians carried off the Ark of the Covenant. Lieutenant Hammond looked at Corporal George steadily for a moment and said, Assess the situation on the ground and come up with an action plan and utilize your team to make that happen if possible. See if you can ascertain anything about this martyr's ministry here, and if he said anything before he was crucified. If he was a missionary, his people deserve to know his fate. Aye, sir. Corporal George brings up a good point. The exarch dominion does not run off of loyalty and duty, but fear and pain. If you can see ways to disrupt the obedience of the subordinate slaves, then take the opportunities you can. Have a care, though. This will result in slaves being tortured or killed. I will be available in my office if anyone has further concerns or questions for the remainder of the night shift, and will be available from the beginning of tomorrow's second shift. We begin drop preparation in 36 hours. You have materials to read, letters to write, and steam to blow off while you still can. Dismissed. Corporal George retreated to his own berth, where he had plans, papers, and envelopes. Some things had to be done the old-fashioned way, and if you are reading these letters, were one of those things. The letters to his brothers had become almost routine, reassurances that he'd died with his boots on, weapons in hand, just like any R&I trooper should, and that he hopes that they can carry his memory with pride. He jotted down a couple of memories as they came to mind. His letter to Yovdril was harder. Due to his missions, his ability to talk to his family had been severely hampered, and the emails had gotten a distant quality. In that letter, he was obliged to apologize for not being there, and for not being able to talk as much as he wanted. The hardest letter to write was the one to his father. Some things never change. Dear Pops, he wrote, I'm sorry for taking the MOS outside the Lost Boys. As I'm sure you know by now, I wound up being somewhat competent at this job, but that's no excuse. You'll be pleased to know that Command has been using my talents properly, sending me on missions of extraordinary danger and extreme consequence. But you know better than most how vital this work is. Then again, you might not agree that it is worth spending a son, not after losing two already. I'm sorry, Pops, since I'm sure you've realized that this is if you're reading this letter. Currently, I'm preparing for a drop that holds the potential to reveal the information that the Republic needs to bring this war to an end. In all likelihood, if you're reading this, one of my brothers in the Uriel platoon, or several of them together, succeeded. I only hope that I managed to help in my own small way. If they tried to heap honors and medals on my corpse, don't hold it against them. You can't repay the dead, so the living do their best to make sure everyone knows what was done. I love you, and I'm sorry. Pete. Then he joined the queue at the postmaster's desk with the rest of the platoon. Nobody spoke. The postmaster didn't ask for instructions on delivery. She already knew the conditions under which these letters are delivered. It began. For the enlisted mess, like any other dinner serving, boidsmen and petty officers and various chiefs had filed in, gotten their steel trays laden with calories of dubious quality and unquestionable taste, collected their beer ration and settled down for a nice dinner, and maybe a chat with their shipmates. Even the R&I shipboard troopers were only minimally rowdy. However, this was directly after an entire platoon of special operators had just completed an exercise in memento mori, and as they trickled in by twos and threes, they wanted to do the same with carpe diem. By the time Corporal George got there, the place was positively raucous. If any civilian eyes had been seen the scene, it would have either sent them apoplectic in fits of rage or hysterical in gales of laughter, and not the least because of the downright unhealthy amounts of alcohol consumed. These humans, destined to drop on a mostly unsuspecting planet full of hostile enemies, looked exactly like those hostiles, and so the sight of what would appear to be Exarch warriors singing, dancing, playing drinking games, or competing to see who could balance in the taller tower of precariously perched chairs was some kind of incongruous. Naturally, Corporal George did what any NCO would do when faced with such a situation. He joined in. After all, there wouldn't be any chance to party dirtside. The party had been going for a good couple hours, and Corporal George had fully proven his family's genetic affinity for dancing, namely, in its complete absence, and was settling down with another beer when he was joined at his little table. "So you're hot shit," PFC Lucas Bennett said, with an ostentatious glance at Corporal George's ribbon block. "Some people think so," he replied, with chagrin. "You think you'll pick up a few more on this drop?" Corporal Peter George just looked at PFC Bennett flatly. "Just a big damn hero to boss the rest of us around." More silence. It built and swelled between them. Others noticed. The silence grew. "I read the AA report. Sounds like something out of a bad fucking movie. Is that what you are? Some kind of freak with a protagonist complex?" "In my position, what would you have done differently?" Corporal Peter George asked softly, like the sound of a round being chambered. The private narrowed his eyes as if searching Corporal George's surgically altered face for something. Corporal George didn't know whether it was something that was there or something that wasn't that made the man relax. "Well, I would have prioritized the vehicle over the officer, and staying for a third shot after they spotted you was chancy. Oh, and the explosive placement was okay, but it could have been better." "Then maybe Command will hang a couple weights off your chest, too," Corporal George said dismissively. The noise suddenly resumed with a clash as PFC Bennett burst out laughing, and Corporal George did the only sensible thing. He sprayed beer out of his nose and glared at the private for making him laugh. "So, this idea about when the Babylonians took the Ark, the Exarch don't exactly have a big statue of their god to make bow to the cross." "No, but they do have blood-soaked altar with a martyr hanging on a cross above it. We can work with that," Corporal George explained through coughing. "But we'll know more when we take a closer look. I like where your head is, but right now is party time. Aye, sir. Don't sir me. I'm Corporal." By the time Lieutenant Hammond arrived to break up the riot, Corporal George had quite lost track of time and how many beers he'd imbibed. He had also lost track of whichever Navy rating had glued empty beer bottles to his forehead like devil's horns. It was in his estimation supremely unfair to pull a prank on a man just before he makes a combat drop, especially the DRS kind of combat drop, considering that they are most likely not going to see the Nathan Hale for months after parting ways. In any case, upon seeing the sorry state of his platoon, Lieutenant Hammond did the only thing a respectable R&I officer could do in such a situation. He joined in. At some point, none of the attendees of the party would be able to tell, not even the skipper, who turned out to be an unaccomplished whiskey drinker. Corporal George's sobriety grew to match Lieutenant Hammond's very moderate inebriation, and they found themselves in a corner of the mess having a quiet chat. "All right, boy," he drawled. "Since you ain't come to my office like I figured you would, I'll come to you. You ever considered OCS? Absolutely not, sir." Corporal George slurred without hesitation. "If you want to slap butter bars on my shoulders, you'll have to drag me kicking and screaming." "Why is that?" the older man asked with a curious creasing in the corner of his eyes. "'Cause it's fucking terrifying. You're fairly good at facing fear. The fuck I am. Just lucky is all. Would you rather have a lucky officer or a smart officer? Fuck that choice. I want both, and make him canny and wily too." "Well, would you look at that?" "Oh, no you don't. No, that's not fucking true. Sure, I'm no dummy, and I'm good at my job, but I just got lucky a couple times is all. So you can't make me take a commission." "No, I can't. Besides, you're not up for promotion anyway. Command wants to see how you deal with a team, and not one you got because pickup was compromised and you had to scramble." Corporal George grunted. Lieutenant Hammond chuckled genially and put a hand on Corporal George's shoulder with a gentle smile. "Fine, I'll think about it. I just want to do my bit, serve the Republic, bring honor to the name. Speaking of, have you called the good general?" "I don't have the authority to go over the chain of command," Corporal George said evasively. "Boy, have you called your father since you joined the DRS battalion?" "No, sir." "Do it. The last thing in the world a man wants is for his son to die thinking his father is angry with him." "Aye, sir." "Good. I think we still have 22 hours of personal time left. I intend on getting some sleep and get on the comms. I recommend a similar course." "Aye, sir." "And boy," "Sir." "See about getting them bottles detached from your forehead. They're outside the regs. Christ, on an artillery support, if I ever see that scrawny little arsehole again, I swear I'll shave him bald and glue his fucking feet to his scalp." One cold shower later, and little Pete was sitting in the comms waiting for his dad to pick up on his end. Oh, that's how it felt to Corporal George. He swallowed as the comms chimed to signal that the connection hadn't completed yet. Then the chime stopped, and Major General Eric George's voice came out a little strained. "Hey, Pete. It's been a while. Sorry, Pops, for going off with another formation like Roger. For not talking to anyone about it. For not calling for nearly a year. Not even after Mr. Smee sunk." "Oh, yeah. And I'm sorry." "I thought for sure you'd want to talk when you heard, if just to speak about Nelson." There was a stone in Corporal George's belly. I don't think he took it well. He tried to shoot himself in my office." Anger boiled up in Pete as he said, "Let me guess. He was in dress white." "Aye," his father answered soberly. "With his sword, aye. And every medal he's ever been awarded, aye." Pete found his hands clenched into shaking fists as he asked, "How did MH let him get to your office?" "I can't get a straight answer from anyone in the medical corps. He's an admiral who lost a ship with all hands. I don't think that's ever happened to him before. Plus, the George family has been his human since you met. Don't they know what that means to him?" "They should have, Pete. And trust me, I've been doing my level best to see where the failure happened." "Well, you tell Admiral Nelson Jock from me that any George who gets bad orders disobeys them." General George chuckled over the comms and said, "I will. Thank you. And congratulations on the promotion. The normal one, not the field one. The chevrons itch, and drop prep starts in 20 hours. The R&I will drag you all the way to a general seat, if you let it." "Aye, sir." "Hear anything from Johnny?" "AA reports. He's another one of you who won't call. MH Command has been taking a hard look at him lately, too. Not sure why. Maybe the same reason they were taking a hard look at me. I'm kind of surprised they haven't given me a mandatory sanctuary rotation." "Are you cracking, Pete?" "I don't think so." "Getting odds looks from your squaddies. The mess get quiet when you walk in." "No, and not often. Things were tense after the first couple of pickups, but I guess pickup is a tense time for all of us." "Then if you are cracking, nobody can tell." "That's comforting," Pete said in the dry tones of a son bristling at his father's humor. General George's voice became quietly serious. "Listen, son. I'm proud of you. I'm not mad about the choices you've made, which is why I guess you took so long to call. Yes, I wanted you to be in the Lost Boys, but you made your own path, and you're a fine addition to the family name." Corporal George felt very small as he asked, "Pops, Do you think that we can... I mean, she was murdered, and we don't even have her complete blogs. Generations lived in her hull. Would it be okay for another ship to be among the star tides we sing one day? I think your grandfather would be furious if we let her stay dead. Thanks, Pops. With that, Pete was obliged to rewrite a letter. Aboard the Jesus Garcia, as she sailed through hyperspace, Captain Mark Ramirez sat like an inscrutable slab of granite behind a desk whose holographic display was alive with activity as his fingers flew across the controls with almost unthinking precision. Med-Tech Emily Sullivan would have been impressed if she wasn't busy trying to comprehend what he'd just told her. Emily, he said, when he realized that she was still sitting there, slack-jawed, I just said that you're being offered a promotion to lieutenant. Med-Tech Takahashi tried to say that she didn't believe him, but all that came out of her uncooperative mouth was, Captain Ramirez tapped his desk, and the holographic displays above it faded away, and he leveled his gaze wholly on Med-Tech Takahashi and said, Emily, I'm not joking around here. Sir, she said, Okay, sir. This isn't a prank, sir, she managed to force out lamely. Well, do you accept? Wait. I get a choice? Captain Ramirez's eyes went a little wide, for he sighed softly before explaining. Every position in every service is a volunteer position. The when, where, and how might not be up to you, but the if always is. That's what it means to serve the Republic and her people. Oh, I knew that. It's just that you didn't really understand, he said gently. I suppose I don't. Still don't. Well, I think I'm getting there. Captain Ramirez fixed his subordinate with an openly patient look by way of response to that. Okay. So before I signed up, I was a nurse, and that's a hard job that helps people well. I thought it was before, anyway. So the thing is, I like being a SAR med-tech way more than being a nurse. It's harder and more dangerous, and it can hurt deeper. But I don't want to quit. So will you take this position, lead the team? Sir, I don't know if I can make this kind of calls you do. What if I send the wrong teammate in? What if I send the right one too late? What if I should send the whole team together and lead myself, but don't see that? What happens now when you make a mistake in triage? For some reason, Captain Ramirez got all blurry in Med-Tech Takahashi's vision as she answered softly. Same thing. Same kind of calls you're already making. Just with bigger consequences for messing up. Indeed. Sir, I don't know if I'm cut out for it. Emily, who started naming the POWs, the former slaves with numbers? Well, that was me, but it was kind of spur of the moment. It wasn't like I made the call. Didn't you? Med-Tech Takahashi felt her spine stiffen as she answered. I guess I did. The right call. God only knows how much trouble it saved us by getting the warriors cooperative, and it genuinely heals them of something they were suffering from. They had been depersoned by their own society, Emily. You saw that. You decided to do something about that. Med-Tech Takahashi blinked the fog from her eyes and nodded before saying, But that's not all someone needs to be a leader in the SAR Corps, sir. No, it's not. You need compassion, insight, and resolve, all of which you've demonstrated. But there are things that are more important in the leader. The ability to make decisions, a cool head, humility. These are the things that you have, and they still might not be enough. The only way to see whether you have what it takes is for you to step onto the mat and put your gloves up. And I'm SAR Corps. We're unbreakable. Unbreakable, Captain Ramirez agreed. I've been wondering something, sir. Ask away. Why is a captain leading a ground team himself? Because he's doing two jobs at once, since there is a shortage of lieutenants to lead ground teams, Captain Ramirez said tiredly. It's not that we're short on personnel, far from it. We're short on experience. Hence my promotion, Med-Tech Takahashi said wryly. Do you remember how the civvies got after the Weesing was sunk? I should. I was one of them. What were the recruiting officers like back then? Fool. Except for one. The SAR Corps has never been very popular with civvies, unless one of them has been directly affected by a shipwreck or a disaster of some kind. They don't really understand how dangerous the job is. And besides, we have no enemy to come to grips with. Not nearly as romantic as a Navy captain, Captain Ramirez said with a smirk before continuing soberly. But we saw our numbers swell anyway. Some from transfers. So once some people realized what combat was like, and that they weren't cut out to endure it. Others like you, who knew themselves from the start. People who knew they couldn't fight, but wanted to help anyway. And we didn't have enough experienced people to properly lead you. But we've been getting experience, more experience than guys like you get in the last decade, MedTech Takahashi realized aloud. Just so. And the hardest, bloodiest kind of experience. War zone ops. MedTech Takahashi swallowed and nodded by way of reply. The grizzled veteran drew open a drawer of the desk and pulled forth a battered, worn box with worn reliefs and faded inlays and held it in his hands where MedTech Takahashi could see. This, he told her, is my treasure box. It was given to me by a Jacobian woman who I helped when her ship lost power from exiting hyperspace and colliding with an asteroid. 207 people died before we could get to them, but I got her, and the rest of the 50 survivors out safe. This is where I keep all of the mementos, letters, and tokens people give me as thanks. This is what keeps me going, Emily. I have a similar box in my quarters, MedTech Takahashi admitted. Clear in her mind, she could picture the dented rations can in which she kept the clumsy scrawled notes from the exarch that she had named. The pressed flowers of a bouquet a Jacobian child made her, because she heard Terence liked flowers. And a bayonet given to her by an R&I trooper she'd found trapped in a deep-powered suit of power armor in a collapsed sub-basement. Will you accept the position of lieutenant in the SAR Corps, Emily? Yes, sir. I'd be honored. Emily had no idea how she got the words out with such a tight throat, but she did. Aboard the Jupiter's Might, as she sailed through hyperspace, Captain Lena Chen was warming up to the Romans. Sure, they were batshit insane, but so were a lot of planets in the CIP, maybe including her own, so long as she didn't have to admit it in front of anybody, particularly not those stuck-up pricks in the Republic. Still, from what the Romans said, the Republic was putting in the work to make the Aspat Dawkins, or whatever they were called, take a few star system-sized steps back. So she had to give them a little grudging respect for that. Okay, maybe a lot of grudging respect, but not where anybody could see her doing it. Besides, if the Republicans would throw her a massive party like the Romans were for her, maybe she'd warm up to them too. But everyone knew they were too stuck up. When Fleet Admiral Lucius Maximus Decimus had first invited the warp-speed battle wagon to dock so that the crew could enjoy a triumph, she was dubious. That is, until it was explained to her that it was basically a massive party with her and a crew as guests of honor. Well, almost a year on non-stop kicking ass with Romans meant that a crew had built up a shit pile of steam to blow off. Sure, they partied with the Romans every now and then, but there was always another fight. And this latest star system taken from the Aspat Dawkins, or whatever they were called, mainly due to the warp-speed battle wagon and a crew taking down the enemy flagship, which made for a great chance for the biggest party yet. She was more than game. Her crew was even more game than that. It had turned out to be the right call. May was surrounded by soldiers out of their armor and shirts, and was drinking in the sight of them just as much as the endless wine that she was enjoying. Lena might have thought about getting into a similar predicament, but she really had her own man, and didn't much like him sharing her with other men. Alexei was similarly entangled to the engineer, except he was surrounded by women, mostly, if skimpily clothed, while he was missing his shirt. And he likewise found his wine cup forever full, no matter how much he drank. Elsewhere, Dr. Bennett was doing what she alleged to be dancing, but Lena thought looked more like a seizure, and both Lee and Jameson were lying to her about how good the dancer she was. Then there was Rajesh, who was somehow reciting what he called an epic ballad about the battle, which might actually be one, but it was hard to make it out through the slurring. Probably there was not a single member of her crew sober, besides herself and Marcus, of course. But somebody had to be grown up, and the captain and her first officer seemed to be the logical choice. After the parade, and the golden laurels, and the speeches and all that fancy shit, Lena found herself hand in hand with Marcus in a relatively quiet part of the main hall. where fire flickered in 2 brazen bowls that casted dancing lights onto marble busts lined up in rows. She recognized a couple of the faces. She squeezed Marcus's hands and didn't say anything. Marcus didn't say anything either. He just drew her closer so that he could wrap an arm protectively across her shoulders and pretend he didn't notice her tears. He was a damn good man. Lena might let him marry her, after all. Aboard the Speaking Softly as she sailed through hyperspace. Ambassador Trevi Drovey was exhausted. Almost a year of banging her head against brick walls alleged to be actual thinking people would do that to anybody. However, that was the least of Trevi's burdens. Her beloved husband and father of her children had perished when the war began. He had been killed along with many of her friends and kin along with their home, the Among the Star Tides we sing. That grief was only complicated by the fact that the dead had died well and heroically, specifically to give her and the rest of the ambassadorial staff a chance to escape and warn the nations at large about the oncoming storm. Now, she had served her people and was a guest of the Republic of Terra and her aligned planets, which she did appreciate. However, a Terran ship was not a ship of the Star Sailors. The only family on board was hers, and though the diminutive but hardy Terrans had made accommodations on their second most prestigious diplomatic vessel, it was not the same as home. All of this weighed on her mind as she took a rare private moment in her quarters to allow herself to miss Yevdril and Robbie and the Honor Guard and the Raldron and the Wee Sing and her friends and the days of peace. The moment was shattered when her youngest daughter came into the little kitchenette with a look in her eyes that did not belong in those of a 5-year-old child. No, 6-year-old. They had missed celebrating her birthday. "Mama," Maeve said softly, "I'm afraid." Trevi pulled out a chair with one hand and used the other 3 to stack the various data pads, communicators, and papers off to the side so that the young girl wouldn't feel like there was anything between them. "Afraid of what, May?" Maeve took a long look at her mother before graciously climbing up into the chair and answering, "A lot of things. I'm scared the bad guys will fight us again. I'm scared that more Terrans and our people will keep getting hurt. I'm scared the fighting won't ever stop. And I'm scared the bad guys will get Yoiv like they got Daddy when he joins the RNI." Trevi was stunned. She had always knew that her son had an affinity for the RNI troopers who served rotations in their home, but had always expected him to join the SAR Corps if he wanted to attain Republican citizenship. Still, there were still 2 years until she had to worry about his embarkation. No, 1 year. He was 17 now, she realized with a pang of guilt. "Well, let's start with the bad guys finding us again. You know that the Republican Navy is full of fine voidsmen, right?" "Aye, Mama. But so is Daddy and everyone. Well, the Speaking Softly is a ship made for fighting from her keel up, and she carries more ships made for fighting inside her. So if the bad guys find us again, we'll be ready to fight this time." Maeve looked at her mother dubiously for a moment before nodding. "Terrans are tough. Just the Honor Guard blew up a bad guy ship by themselves. But until the fighting stops, I'm afraid people will keep getting hurt. So Mama will do her best to make the fighting stop. That's why we don't bug you, so that you can make all of the planet people stop being dumb faster." That felt like a knife in her ear. Starve my heart. Please bug me more. Duty to family comes ahead of duty to people. Maeve nodded sagely and answered, "That's our duty to you, to make sure that you can do your work. Yoiv does Daddy's job now, but if he's gonna go, then who'll make the monsters go away at night? Who'll make the Terran cake? Who'll sing the old songs when we're sad?" Leah tried to make him change his mind, but he wouldn't, even when she told him that they'd make him fight with no ship. "I think Yoiv wants to go to where the bad guys are and get them so they can't get you," Trevi told her, as she drew Maeve into a tight embrace. "And those are Mama's jobs anyway. I'm sorry for slipping for so long. It just so happened that the young girl couldn't see the tears streaming down her mother's face, hugged as tightly as she was." End of chapter.